but I have to admit, I like this chair better. I like the one up there. I know that we're going to have a few other folks join us. Let me go ahead and offer a word to y'all and to those who are joining us online. Our speaker this evening is ill, so I've got notes, and I'm going to try to offer the same information they were going to, in addition to a little scriptural and theological framework for us as we begin the. We're going to give folks just a few more minutes to join. You'll hang in there with us if you're online. We'll start in about 3 minutes. So, good evening, friends, and welcome to those of you who are with us online and those of you who are with us here in our sanctuary. It's good to be with you as we start this first of 3 presentations, conversations about the possibilities and the potential of affordable housing development here on our site. I mentioned earlier, I hate to say it both for your sake and for mine, that our assigned presenter was ill and is not able to be with us. So I've got notes, and I'll go through those tonight. And if there are additional questions I can't answer, we'll work to get you those answers as we move forward. So I have my show notes here. So just some context for us. This is the first of three presentations on the potential outcome and our desired impact for affordable housing development here on our site. So what that means is that this is not a presentation about what a building would look like. It's not even a presentation about whether or not we're going to do it. It's simply trying to understand the landscape and begin to determine what it might mean for us to step into that landscape faithfully with the resources we have at our disposal. We have 2 additional presentations, one on April 16th at 11:30 a.m. That's on the financial impact of the project, and one on May 13th at 10:30 a.m. on the design impact of the project. Now, you can tell there's some time in between each of those, and the purpose for that is that in those intervening 3 weeks, there are going to be a number of facilitated 6 to 8 person roundtable conversations. And the goal in those conversations is really for us to kind of get down in the weeds of what we're learning in these presentations. So if you're joining us online after tonight, I'm glad that you're with us. Please make sure that you email discernment@silverspringumcp.org if you've got additional questions. These roundtable conversations are really going to be where we're giving feedback, where we're sharing insight, where we're dreaming about what might be possible in each of these areas of impact. And at the end of that 12-week period of discernment, I see we have some folks joining us just now. At the end of that 12-week period of discernment, we'll gather on June 4th at 1:30 p.m. That time is hot off the presses. The district superintendent just confirmed it, for a special church conference, where at that point we'll have an opportunity to affirm or not our desire to develop affordable housing, and if we decide to move forward, to empower a building committee who will then be responsible for putting the meat on the bones of the dream, so to speak. All that goes to say that there are going to be lots of opportunities for conversation, for engagement. I want to encourage us all to participate in those. In a project of this magnitude and in a conversation of this kind, all of us are going to have insight that we need to do this work well together. That includes members of our neighborhood association who've actually already begun to engage and be engaged in some conversations. So why don't we pause for a moment of prayer, and we'll dive into this first presentation. Lord, your love has called us here. Your love is made manifest in the bricks and mortar of this building. Your love is made manifest in the hands and hearts that hold us in community in this building. Your love for our neighbors has called us to this building. And so we ask that you would send the power of your Holy Spirit to be with us, that we might be good stewards of the love that has been invested in us and entrusted to us to share with others. Help us to dream dreams that open up space for all people, not just to live, but to thrive in all the ways that your love makes possible. We ask this in the power of Jesus' name. Amen. So the question at hand in tonight's presentation is this: how would affordable housing impact our community, both those who call this church home and those who don't? How will it impact our neighbors, meaning our neighbors in the immediate vicinity of our building? And how will it impact our neighbors in the broader context of Montgomery County and Prince George's County and the District of Columbia? Because, of course, living in a place like this, our community is much bigger than just our 4 or 5 city blocks. And then finally, what kind of impact we hope we might be able to have in addressing housing insecurity and affordability in Montgomery County? So that's the question at hand. And as we explore it, I wanted to begin with a reflection on reading from the Gospel of Matthew, the 25th chapter, beginning with the 31st verse. I'll read that now. And I would invite you to assume a posture that allows you to receive what Spirit is saying. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All of the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them, people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did it to me." Now, if you remember any of our teaching on the Gospel according to Matthew earlier in the year, you'll know that Matthew, the author of Matthew, is deeply concerned with something called orthopraxy and not orthodoxy. Orthopraxy means right action. How does what we do align with our values and our vision? Orthodoxy means right belief. Do I believe the right thing? We don't live in an if you build it, they will come kind of world, is really what Matthew is saying. Matthew is saying your actions have to help build what it is you hope to be, right? That your actions really are what help you believe the things you should believe, right? That right action leads to right belief. And as we act, we learn what we believe, why it matters, and why it's right. Act first on the kingdom of God, and then second on believing the right things, right? Rather than creating a book of discipline, don't tell the district superintendent I said this, and then trying to force your belief into that book of discipline. Now, notice that the persons commended by Jesus didn't even know they were seeing Jesus, right? They did the right thing. They fed hungry people. They clothed naked people. They visited sick people. In one version of the text, it says, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. And literally what that means is a random person walks up to your house off the street and you open the door and you open your larders and you feed them as if they're one of your own, right? Jesus is saying that anytime they do this, to the least of these, the most marginalized, they're doing it for Jesus. They didn't know the cosmic implications, right? They didn't have permission. They didn't have a complex financial regulation policy in place that told them they should do this thing. They did the right thing. They built the things they needed to do to make the right thing happen. And what are those principles, those kingdom principles? Well, based on the text, centering the most marginalized is the primary focus of our work, witness, and action. Jesus is clearly saying that the kingdom of God and that Jesus, the identity of the Word made flesh, is revealed in the most marginalized, the hungry, the poor, the imprisoned, the stranger. Jesus is clearly saying that part of the principle is meeting the concrete needs of our neighbors, right? It's not simply enough to say, I love you, if your actions don't reveal the love you offer. And Jesus is also saying that addressing the injustices, even at the risk of losing face in polite society, that afflict their communities is a part of those kingdom principles, right? Visiting the imprisoned, right? Standing up for and fighting for the politically oppressed. The text is really highlighting here that Christ is revealed to and through the lives and the lived experience of the economically, socially, and politically oppressed persons in specific and powerful ways. That these are neighbors that have something to teach us about who God is and who we are in relationship with God. So with that in mind, I wanted to spend a few minutes thinking about who some of the most marginalized were in Montgomery County as we think about the social impact that we might want to have and the kind of community we might want to build. And I wanted to offer some statistics. More than 40% of owner-occupied housing units, that's single-family homes and condos, and more than 50% of renter-occupied housing units are occupied by households that are considered housing burdened. This was a new definition for me as we entered this process. What that means is that those family units are paying more than 30% of their annual income for housing. Now, keep in mind that the area median income in Montgomery County is about $113,000, a little bit more, but that the majority of housing need in Montgomery County, almost 80% of people in need of housing, live at 60% of that AMI, that area median income number, which means that people making less than $100,000 a year, families making less than $100,000 a year, are spending 30% and more of their income just to make sure there's a safe roof over their heads. And that means that other things then don't get taken care of. Medicine doesn't get bought. Food doesn't get put in the fridge. Utility bills don't get paid. Rent doesn't get paid. And then evictions occur. And evictions have increased 30%, I think it is, in the last 6 months here in Montgomery County. You can drive right down Spring and see 2 places where people have been evicted in the last week. Their stuff's still on the curb because they can't afford to get movers to come pick up their belongings. Now again, area median income is defined as the midpoint of a specific area's income distribution, and it's calculated on an annual basis by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I misspoke earlier because this is one of the statistics that somebody shared with me. It's not one I've yet got memorized. In Montgomery County, the AMI is actually $117,345 based on the 2021 census. And what that tells us is that there are people sitting in our pews, sitting here right now, and on our staff here at the church that live at or below 60% area median income. So when we think about our neighbors, Our neighbors aren't simply the people that we assume need affordable housing. They're our pastors and our church musicians and family ministry directors. They're the people that are scheduling us at the doctor's office. They're the people that are serving us our coffee. They're also our police officers and our first-year nurses and our first-year teachers. According to the Housing and Urban Development Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy data collected in 2016 through now, that's a mouthful, over 25,000 rental households in our county pay 50% or more of their annual income in rent and other housing costs, which reduces that number from the 70 that they might otherwise have down even further. 99% of the households that fall into that category make less than $100,000 annually, right? Now, Montgomery County has been bleeding affordable housing for decades now. Part of the practice that we're now seeing flowing into DC actually started here when the county began to sell off affordable housing developments and Section 8 housing that it had built back in the 60s as part of the first round of urban redevelopment to for-profit and private developers. So what that's meant is moving from down county to up county, we're seeing rapid declines in the number of affordable housing units. That reality is even more stark in the light of unprecedented growth in the number of new Americans who have come into the county at the same time. The county is growing rapidly, and we're not building enough housing units to keep up. The county currently lacks nearly 50,000 housing units, period. No questions asked about income. 50,000 housing units we need to build just to live, for the people who already live here, to live here. And of that, those 50,000 housing units, almost all of them are families earning less than the 50% of the area median income. So keep that in mind as well. From a home ownership perspective, and some of you are deeply aware of this, I have no doubt, the average price for a single-family detached home in Montgomery County, the average price, keep in mind that's the entire county, right, is more than $770,000. When you shrink that down to just Silver Spring, that number jumps to almost $1 million. It goes without saying that even for many middle-income families, home ownership is unattainable. People can't afford the down payments unless they have generational wealth. And as we know, the history of segregated housing and racially restrictive covenants in our county have inordinately impacted the ability of people of color and people of different religions and ethnicities from being able to build the generational income necessary to buy into the current housing market in Montgomery County, right? So the majority of people also impacted are people of color and single parents and women. Now, this means too that we have on our among our firefighters, our police, and our teachers, a large number. There's not been a study of it done of people who can't afford to live here, even though they work here. So there are people who live farther out and drive in county just to keep us safe, to teach our kids, to make sure that we have the public services our tax dollars are paying for. Now, multifamily homes, that's not a single family home, in the county sell on average for about $375,000. But due to zoning restrictions, this is where it gets really fun, due to zoning restrictions, you can only build multifamily housing, including duplexes, on 2% of the buildable land in our county. 2%. And the majority of that is up county. We're going to get to why up county and down county matter here in a minute. Even though the county government, both executive and council, articulate a keen focus on equity, lack of access to affordable home ownership opportunities has contributed to a 32% gap between white families and Black and African families when it comes to home ownership. Keep that in mind. And in Prince George's County, home values and rental costs continue to rise at the second highest rate of any DC metro jurisdiction. So even extending beyond Montgomery County, people who live in the county over and in the district are experiencing the same kinds of issues that we're facing. In Prince George's County, a resident needs to earn $71,000 annually or work 137 hours a week or a year at the minimum wage rate to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. I'm going to say that again because I fumbled and it's an important statistic. In Prince George's County, a resident needs to earn $71,000 annually or work 137 hours at the minimum wage rate to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, or earn $62,000 and work 119 hours to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. So suddenly, if you have a family, a kid, maybe a grandparent or an aunt or a sibling that's living with you, you're cramming multiple family members into very small spaces, which impact learning outcomes for children, impacts quality of life, and impacts health and safety. Housing cost is a major issue as available housing does not align with family earning. This is really important for me, and it was a big learning, in part due to a question asked by our vision team. Lack of housing options is a third major problem, and housing quality is another big issue as we're looking at all of this. There's a need for a missing middle option is what I'm saying. So we're not talking about supportive housing, which is generally provided for folks who are experiencing domestic abuse, who are coming out of homelessness, who are in recovery. There is a deep and desperate need for housing for workforce employees. And again, that's people earning up to 80% of that area median income. Only white, non-Hispanic households meaningfully exceed. This is important too, because it's not simply a money issue, it is a racial issue, and it's rooted in our past. Only white, non-Hispanic households meaningfully exceed the county-wide ownership rate. And recent reports show that it is more expensive to rent in Prince George's County than it is to own, which is quickly becoming true in Montgomery County. So, people who don't have the generational wealth necessary to buy a home, or the access to resources to buy a home, are spending more money. Their savings over the course of their life are being reduced, meaning that their debt at the end of life and the debt passed on to their children is increasing, which reduces their children's ability to further buy into home ownership options here in the county. So now we're not just looking at a moment in time, we're looking at decades and decades and decades of widening impact. Not just that we've inherited, but that we're looking at over the next 20 and 30 years. Does that make sense? Do you see the connection there? As one family's...
The other impact is
right.
And as a consequence, available to buy, rented at a they're in it for the money.
Dave makes an excellent point. That's something that doesn't often get named. That right now, all kinds of investment funds and mutual funds and corporations are, as a way of having secure income over a long period of time, purchasing single-family homes, turning them into rental homes, often with very low quality, and then renting them back to people at a much higher rate than they would have to pay to own them, which is another major issue. Many affordable housing units available are 1 and 2 bedroom units. I just want to go back to this because this is important. And the average age of affordable housing stock in Montgomery County is 40 years old. And here's why that's important. Most of these units are unsafe and unrenovated. How many of us live in a home that's been renovated at least once in the last 40 years? Or that it's built in the last 40 years? How many of us have bought a new appliance in the last 40 years? Right? Or bought decorations for our home that we didn't have to worry would be damaged by water or mold or rats or ants or roaches. For the majority of people living in affordable housing options available in Montgomery County, this is not their reality. Right? Their children and their families are being exposed daily to environmental hazards that impact their quality of life. And they're unable to have things that they get to keep and possess that are special without risk of water damage, smoke damage, mold damage, fire damage, all those kinds of things. It's important. There is little to no safe, affordable housing in Montgomery County. And when you start talking about accessibility for people that have mobility needs, that number gets even higher of unsafe, inaccessible units. So who does this tell us the most marginalized are? They represent a wide swath of persons in our community. As we've already said, some of them are our neighbors and friends. I guarantee at least one of us lives next to somebody for whom some of these economic statistics are a reality, whether because of their age or because of other life factors. And we may not even know it. Chances are we probably don't. Again, I'll note that all of our staff at this church live below the area median income, and all of us live below the 80% income. I just barely crossed the 60%. Just barely, right? So keep that in mind as well. These are people, the most marginalized that we've been naming are people that we see and work with every day, that we rely on to help us have what we need to be able to survive, and that are oftentimes living in places that are unsafe for them and their families. So, with that in mind, here are some definitions to help us think about ways that we can provide wraparound support to address some of these issues. And these are just definitions of the kinds of housing that we might consider building. So supportive housing, do we feel like we know what supportive housing is? Okay. So potentially it's somebody that's experiencing a kind of physical or medical need. Sometimes it's folks that are coming out of addiction services or rehab centers. Sometimes it's people who've experienced domestic abuse. Supportive housing, what makes it supportive is that it combines non-time limited affordable housing, meaning you don't time out in 3 months or 6 months or 8 months, with wraparound support services, meaning that there are additional services provided by social workers or other providers that help people who are experiencing homelessness, people with disabilities, those experiencing domestic abuse, and those leaving incarceration, just to name a few. Workforce housing. Workforce housing refers to any form of housing, including ownership or single-family or multifamily homes that are rented. And workforce housing is generally understood to mean affordable housing for households with earned income that is insufficient to secure quality housing within reasonable proximity to the workplace. Does that make sense? So it's the teachers that have to drive 40 miles to get to their job at Blair, right? It's the cafeteria worker that drives 40 miles, 2 hours in traffic, maybe 3 if they're unlucky on the Beltway, to get to Einstein. In Montgomery County, workforce housing, both rental and purchase, is qualified as being for persons who don't qualify for our moderately priced dwelling unit program, which we'll talk about in a second. Low-income housing. What does low-income housing mean? Let me just ask quickly, if you were to think of, what are pictures that come to mind when you think of low-income persons living in low-income houses or low-income housing? Who do we think of as the population living in them? So we think about Section 8 housing, right? What else? People who are immigrants. We have been conditioned as a society to assume that people who are low income or need low income housing look a very particular kind of way. That is both evidence of our institutionalized racism and economic oppression that's enforced by lots of systems that I'm not going to name because we would spend all night naming them. And it's absolutely not true. Designated by the federal government, low-income housing is any household earning less than 80% of that area median income. Somebody have their phone handy with a calculator? I don't have this number written down, but I think it would be important to name. Can somebody figure out what 80% of $117,000 is? What's that? 80% of AMI, area median income, is $93,600. $93,600. How many of us entered the workforce making $93,600? How many of us got there in the first, well, I'm not going to ask that question. How many of us have that same kind of income at the end of life or anticipate having that same kind of income at the end of life? End of life. Think close to end of retirement. Think end of retirement. Okay, some folks do. The vast majority of people living in our county don't and never will because of all of those other things that we've named. Very low income housing. So that's low income. Low income is just $93,000. Very low income is designated by the federal government as any household earning less than 50% of the area median income. I do have the number for this. That's $58,000 for a four-person household. That's very low income. We have teachers that are just barely making that much, right? We have people waiting on us in restaurants that are not making nearly that much. We have people who are receptionists at the doctor's office that are not making that much. Extremely low income. We're above supportive housing still. Extremely low income. Designated by the federal government as any household earning less than 30% of the area median income. In Montgomery County, that is $35,000. And there are lots of folks, particularly folks who are earning minimum wage, who don't make that amount of money. And when you figure that wage workers are inordinately impacted by lack of access to things like health insurance and paid time off and family leave, a single crisis in somebody's life can put them out of housing in the blink of an eye. Now, the moderately priced dwelling unit program here in Montgomery County was originally intended to provide affordably priced homes, both new, resale, and rental, offered to first-time home buyers and renters who have a moderate level of household income. But the problem with the MPDU program here in Montgomery County is that number is $93,000 annually, right? So the majority of people in need of affordable housing in Montgomery County don't qualify for the one program that's meant to help them qualify for affordable housing in Montgomery County. That's a significant number for me. I'm almost done, and then I want to open it up for questions and comments and thoughts. What are some of the challenges that we're facing as we look at this social landscape, as we think about what it means to serve the least of these? What are some of the challenges? Development of housing units in Montgomery County across the board has slowed dramatically in the last 20 years. That's not just affordable housing, that's all housing, in part because of some of the things we've already named. But our population growth continues to increase. And we're anticipating needing to build an additional 300,000 units of housing in the next decade just to keep up. Right? That's not for any desired growth. That's not to help protect the diversity we all like to celebrate, but that is rapidly disappearing. That is just to keep up with the anticipated growth here in Montgomery County. And again, most of the affordable housing stock available and being built is up in the upper part of Montgomery County. Now, why do you think that might be important? There's a lot of land up there, for sure. Most of it can't be built on because of the ag reserve. But why would that be a problem? Why is it a problem that? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There's ton of construction happening, like up Damascus Way, for sure. But if you are somebody that is living at the low income level, and it's a family, let's say you're a family of 5, gas is what, $3.21 a gallon right now? And you have to get to a job in Down County. And you also have to get your kid to school. And your spouse also has to get to work because you have to have dual income just to be able to afford where you live. Suddenly, lack of access to public transit and transit centers is an inordinate problem that contributes to the loss of housing. Right? Because so much of your expense is gone trying to keep jobs down county, but you can't afford to live down county, you have to live up county. Lack of access to transit centers and public services at a considerable deficit are what occur for families that are living in affordable units up county. And the affordable units down county are the ones that are regularly catching fire, that are having gas leaks that lead to explosions, that we all know. Lack of access to affordable housing exponentially increases, sometimes by a magnitude of 40%, the chances that a person will go hungry, will get sick and not be able to receive treatment, will drop out of school, will experience divorce, will experience a mental health crisis, will be incarcerated, will become addicted to a substance. Housing is the single most important factor in preventing a whole variety of social injustices and securing and preserving the thriving of our community. So, when we think about social impact, who are the most marginalized? They're our neighbors and our pewmates and our friends. What is our call? How might we step into that need? As you can see, the need is so vast, there are a variety of ways we can do that. And so what I'd like to do now is just open up the floor to hear your reactions to the information that's been shared, to hear questions that you think might be helpful for some of these roundtable conversations that are going to happen, and to generally share your thoughts about what you might want to see the social impact be if we were to develop affordable housing on our property. And friends online, you're more than welcome to comment as well. Our AV support person, Ryan, is ready and has a microphone and everything. He's ready to make sure that we hear your voice too. So you can sound off in the comment sections as well.
Well, we could go the Chinese route and build a 50-story high-rise to try to house as many people as possible, or we could be more mindful about what we can do here realistically in order to help at least have some kind of an impact, at least for a smaller group of people that we can talk about who we might like to welcome. We need to be realistic, I guess, about what we can do, and because the need is so great. I mean, we can seems to me almost like a pinprick. You know, we can make an impact in certain bounds. Does that make sense?
I live in D.C. and there are height restrictions. Are there any height restrictions in Montgomery County?
Gladys, that's a really good question. And the answer is that, yes, there are lots and lots and lots of restrictions on lots and lots of things. When it comes to the restrictions on this lot, it depends on the zone that the building is in. Right now, we're zoned R60, which means that only single-family homes can be built on this piece of property. However, there are processes in place to rezone through what typically would be called a local map amendment, the property so that we could build differently. Even if we do that, there are height restrictions, and that's something we'd have to be mindful of as we look at the total volume of units we might build. That'd be a good question for the design conversation, where we'll learn a little bit more about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I know there's other conversations. Would the church be a landlord? I mean, would the church hold mortgages? Would the church be renting or selling? And that's, from a tactical perspective, I'd be curious along those lines. And is that then a business line for the church?
So that's a really good question. And again, I will offer what information I've learned in the last couple of months. Typically, the way that something like this would be done is through what's called a land lease. So we would land lease to a development corporation, of which we would be a partner, a portion of the property for developing affordable housing. Any kind of development that we would look at would require a number of partners, right? We certainly could not upfront the cost, and we would not be upfronting the costs. What we do bring is the value of our property, which has right now been valued at $27 million, the land that the building sits on. In exchange for that land lease, there's a lump sum payment back to the church. So there's income then to help offset costs to whatever we might want to do with the facility that we keep. And then the corporation, because they receive low-income housing tax credits, is responsible for hiring a nationally or even globally accredited firm to manage the property. So we would not be landlords. We're not going to be changing pipes or receiving rent. That's being done through a third party that's brought in by that development corporation. And then we're receiving annual income off of that rent as well. So part of what that does is secure an income that we can anticipate every year that could be allocated in a number of ways. We could say we wanted it all to go back to mission and justice ministry. We could say that we wanted it to all go back into a capital fund to address long-term capital issues in the building that we maintain. There are some. Most of it is around selling property or significant changes to the building. So the question was, are there rules in the discipline? The rules primarily state that we have to be approved up a chain of command. So once our building committee, if we empower one, is formed, they would do their work, both of working on the financing piece and working on the design piece. I anticipate that process would incorporate more roundtable conversations about design elements and those things. That will come back to our congregation for a vote. After that happens, it will go to the District Committee on Building and Grounds for a vote. Once it's voted on there, it goes to the conference trustees for a vote, and then it goes before the annual conference for a vote. So those are the rules that they offer. They don't offer rules on affordable housing specifically. And in fact, this initiative was begun through a free affordable housing feasibility study offered by the annual conference, who actively approached congregations like ours with excess land with the opportunity to have that study done to see if this was possible and what the income generation might be off of a project like that.
So what portion of the property are we talking about? So you want us to talk more from a social, like whether this is the. Mm-hmm. I think so. I mean, for me, clearly, the need for affordable housing is tremendous in the county, and I feel like anything that we can do to help alleviate that challenge, we should be doing. And so I guess questions I have is, yes, so I think whatever we're thinking of, great, let's do it. And there's also advocacy organizing opportunities around pushing for policies that kind of help get to some of the root. Because I think to your point earlier, there's only I don't know how many units we'd be able to build. That's a great contribution. But I feel like there's also other actions we can be taking with other activists in the county to address this on a systemic level.
Are we looking to serve, develop housing for, was it workforce housing as well as low-income housing, the levels that you were talking about?
That's kind of what I'm hoping y'all will help us answer. So let me ask this question of you as we're thinking about this. Let's assume there's a world in which we develop affordable housing on our property. I like to say that our bricks and mortar should follow our vision and values. Everything we do in bricks and mortar should embody in some way our vision and values. So if we were to build something, what are the values you would want to see embodied? Or what's the vision for the kind of community you would want to create? Does that make sense?
This is really big picture, so maybe not even helpful, but I love the idea of creating affordable housing on our space. And I really love the idea of creating a space that is a community where people, in my mind, it would be a mix of generations, the older, the younger, different, income levels. One of the things I've realized kind of over the years is that because I live in a single family home in a neighborhood when I think about, fundraising for my job or something, I think let's send out an email on the listserv, and let me knock on my neighbors' doors because I know them and can, talk about these things. And I say that to a 23-year-old actually doing fundraising for the organization that I work for, and they look at me like I'm crazy because the way that, the different generation interacts is mostly over social media. But I would love to, imagine a community that we could create would encourage interaction on a more personal level. And maybe that's design. Maybe we create buildings around a center garden and have, a community garden in the middle. Maybe it's, there's a lot of things that go into it. But for me, one value I think about is how do we facilitate, actual interaction.
And I just want to highlight something, Jane, that you offered too, that I think that is really important in this, that this project is as much about shifting policy that is the roadblock, right? And I think one of the things we need to be prepared for as we dream is that that's going to be part of the process. Not only are we going to need to partner to address this issue for whatever we might decide to do, but because if we're going to build this needs to be a part of who we are as a movement of Christ's love, right? It can't just be something that we're doing to make some extra money, which I think is important. So the social impact we're talking about is also an impact on the DNA of our congregation. I see an online question, and then I think I saw another hand over here.
Yes, one common, speak into the microphone when asking questions. But I do have a question online from Daryl Davis asking if SSMUMC would empower a developer to build affordable housing on the property, would or could that include any supportive social services within that facility?
So Daryl is asking a really great question too, which is, would this include or could this include any supportive social services? If we choose, or if we feel like one of the values we want to embody is providing supportive housing, the answer is yes. That's part of what we get to decide. As a development partner in this corporation, we get to determine the mix of units up to a certain point, right? Like at some point it's got to be profitable for the people who are participating in the corporation, but we get to determine the mix of units that go in. So part of what I'm hearing now is some bubbling up of what's possible and what we might want to see happen. So yes, Daryl, thank you. And I'll try to speak more clearly into the microphone. Other questions or other thoughts? If you think about what values or what vision make us who we are as a church, that we would want to see embodied in the bricks and mortar that we laid, what are some of those values? What's some of that vision? Who would you want to see as our neighbor? Michelle said somebody who needs affordable housing. Yes.
I just think it's really important that we are selective in who the developer is, because to your earlier point, there are so many people living in affordable housing where the conditions are so deplorable. And I just have a high level of skepticism of developers in general because of that. And so I would just love to see what process is used to make sure that we select a developer who's committed to making sure that the units are kept at a high quality.
Just quickly, the value, and I'll come to Becky, and then to the value that I heard expressed. I think, Jane, I just want to make sure I understand, is that high quality, safe housing is something that we care deeply about. Okay. Right. Right.
So I just want to highlight really quick something, or bring up again something that Debbie had just said. I mean, I really like the idea of having a mix of people from different, as we think about supportive housing, workforce housing, low income, very low, extremely low, kind of in my mind right now, I would say let's see how inclusive of all those categories can we be, versus saying I want to, like, yeah, I guess that's it.
This, thank you for saying what you said, Jane, because, and then what Debbie and Becky said also, because I'm reminded of something that, so my 30 seconds of background, my mom was heavily involved in the Methodist Church in Virginia, and and she was a bookkeeper and tax preparer by trade. So she was always involved in how churches showed, not wrote down, if that makes sense, but showed what they did, where they put their money where their mouth is and where their heart is. She was very big on this idea. And I think I would really like this, if we move forward with it, to have in mind the idea of almost like first fruits. Like, this would not be, well, we're just going to have some low income housing, but we're going to have housing that anybody and everybody would want to actually live in. Like, have it be a show, not to show off, but to show this is the kind of housing that the people we want to be here should have, and it's safe, and it's it's energy efficient, and it's made of reliable and durable materials, and all these things that we think, well, what would be the best? What would be the best? It doesn't mean the most expensive, but what would be the best for these people that we want, that we would want to be our neighbors in our community. And I just feel moved to say that, because I feel that that would be a great guiding principle, because that can help us make the decisions whenever we do make them, or whatever kind of decisions we make, to keep that in mind. So,
Other questions? See an online question.
Oh, just one comment to follow, piggyback off Kevin. I'm hearing it's not charity, right? Necessarily, and also being concerned about recognizing people's dignity.
So it's not charity and recognizing people's dignity. Thank you.
And then there is a question online from Scott McGinnis regarding if we've had conversations with the folks at Hughes about their housing that they built on site.
So we're in a slightly different situation. So let me explain a quick zoning difference here, because this does actually matter. There's a difference between developing senior-only affordable housing and the kind of mixed housing that we've been talking about here today. Senior-only affordable housing is zoning exempt in the county, which means there are less zoning regulations you have to go through. The kind of process that we're talking about, the kind of housing we're talking about, requires a lot more engagement with parks and planning, with the council, all those kinds of things. Hughes Memorial currently has senior affordable housing on their property. They too, like us, are in a process of discernment about developing for more affordable housing. In fact, I believe they're a little bit farther along in the process. We're just engaged in it. We're not close enough yet to be engaged in the nuts and bolts of some of those projects that have already moved on further. Right, we're still in the dreaming phase for what we might do. But it's important to note that both the vision team and the leadership council have talked about the importance of engaging other voices. We also have Reverend Tim Warner, who has preached here, who's at Emory Grove. They're going through a big affordable housing development process. We've got Emory Fellowship down the road on Georgia Avenue, who's gone through a big affordable housing development on their property. So we have lots of good partners along the way as we're trying to figure out how we do this well.
Part of the other, in terms of the way we can think that we can interact and be part of whatever community we're seeking to create here, is that we have a daycare center already on site that could be expanded or whatever. We can talk about that. Also, we need to think about transportation, because if you think about it, anybody is living here might not have a car. How are they going to go to the grocery store? They're going to have to take get transportation. Luckily, we're on a major thoroughfare, and I think a fairly easy way to get a ride-on bus or to come around the corner to pick people up or whatever they need to get to work or to get to there, because there are some grocery stores in Silver Spring and also in Wheaton, so they could get, and it's about equidistant there. But those are some of the things that, as we talk about that, we need to give some real thought to. And what other services would this church want to provide to anybody there? You have a pantry, right? Once a month. You have a week. No. That's something that we, church, need to consider.
Gladys? It's hard to tell if Gladys is going to become a bus driver or she's starting a new ministry. Either way, Gladys is down. Gladys is down, which is great. The value that I heard expressed there that I think is really important too kind of ties back into what you were saying, Jane, in that as we do this as a congregation, we need to be mindful of the ways we're going to be called to serve the neighbors who are now living on our corner with us, right? And so this will require not simply thinking about the design of the building and the people living in it, but how our ministries do and don't align with the emerging needs of the people that call this place home, so that we're being targeted with our resources to address those needs, right? Which may mean that we start new ministries. It may mean we end some ministries. So there's social impact for us as well as a congregation, right? It means the fabric of who we are develops in a different way. Doesn't go away, doesn't get ripped up and thrown away. It just gets added to. The tapestry gets more colorful. That's right. Health and Human Services is right next door. One of the important things to note as we think about social impact is proximity. I think for me, one of the things that I'm excited about is creating more affordable housing in proximity to downtown Silver Spring, which increases access both to public resources like the library and county services, but also gives people access to transit. I'm reminded there was a gentleman I knew in D.C. when I was a pastor there who was regularly on 17th Street at night to sleep. And he would wake up early in the morning, 3 and 4 in the morning, and he would rinse off using a spigot behind the church, and then he would walk to Silver Spring where he worked. And then he would walk back the 6.5, 7 miles to the 17th Street area to sleep because he felt safer down there than he did up here. And that was the only way he had to get back and forth, right? So just giving people access to transit is a powerful gift. Other thoughts, other questions, other ideas or visions that have sprung to mind? Okay. Well, here's the invitation for next steps. Over the next 3 weeks, is there an online? Oh, good. All right. Sorry, online folks, glad you're still here. Feel free to comment between now and the time I stop talking. Over the next 3 weeks, there are going to be a number of 6 to 8 person roundtable conversations. I want to encourage you to sign up for those and to encourage at least one other person who's not in this space tonight to do the same. Participation in those conversations is going to make a big difference in whatever vision does or doesn't get handed off to our building committee. So, if we empower a building committee, the conversations we're having now are going to be their guideposts. You get to help set them. If you've got questions about how to sign up, you can email discernment at Silver Spring, that's discernment at silverspringumcp.org. There is a listening session after church this Sunday here, room TBD. So if you would like to sign up for that, you can email that email address or look for a link to a Sign Up Genius coming out very shortly. And we'll make sure that gets posted online and shared in all the places we can possibly share it when it gets prepared. And then finally, I want to encourage you to spend the next 12 weeks in deep and thoughtful prayer. Pray. Take time when you get here on Sunday morning to walk into a room you've not been in a while and pray about that space and pray for that space, both what it's currently doing and what it could be. Come sit in the sanctuary for a few minutes after worship and pray for this space. Walk the property. the sidewalks, the trees, the courtyard. Pray for the physical things God has given us, that we have the wisdom and the ability to be able to discern what God is calling us to do with them. And then the clarity of thought and creativity to build back what needs to be built back for who God is calling us to be moving forward. Can we commit to praying on a regular basis about this? Can we commit to praying for one another in this? And can we commit to signing up for these roundtable conversations? Thank you. Well, friends, it's been a gift to be with you. I promise I will not be doing the next one of these, so hopefully you'll have somebody that knows a little bit more than I do. I'm learning with you as we go, but I'm glad to be your partner in that. And thank you. Have a good night.